So we have some breaking news. Emerson Polling has just released some new data about New Mexico, and it's really, really positive news for Bernie Sanders, both in the primary and in a potential general election versus Trump. The poll shows that Bernie Sanders has the lead in the primary process. He's beating Joe Biden only by 1 point, but he is in first place. And the gap between Biden and Sanders and the rest of the field is absolutely massive. Yang actually comes out here in third place. Andrew Yang, this is a strong result for him. He's polling at 10%, which is better than his national polling, and he rarely, if ever, finds himself in the top 3. It's actually Buttigieg and Warren that struggle here, neither of them being able to crack 10. What this shows is a few key things. One, it shows that Buttigieg and Warren may not have the broad national appeal that Sanders and Biden do. That at the end of the day, they might be strong in individual states and in individual regions, but it's Bernie and it's Biden that seem to be at least somewhat strong everywhere. And that really matters because your ability to rack up delegates requires consistency across the states. And it has to be remembered that there's a 15% threshold to get delegates. And so if you're consistently polling below 10 in some states, you might find yourself not only behind the leaders, but without any delegates at all. So for Buttigieg and for Warren, this is a concerning poll. And I think this shows that for both of them, they're either losing momentum or their momentum has stalled. And unless something changes, I don't know if they're going to be able to catch up to Biden and Sanders and make this a true 3-horse race. This is also really interesting because I feel this is a good sign for Andrew Yang. Of course, while it's a bad sign for Buttigieg and Warren, it's because we're casting that in the context that they have a chance to win. I don't think Andrew Yang has a chance to win this contest, to actually become the nominee. But certainly, he's made a name for himself and he's made an impact. Like him or not, Andrew Yang has gone from an also-ran to a second-tier candidate. And I think that's incredibly important to realize here. Andrew Yang was basically a nobody 6 months ago, a year ago. And when we were talking about candidates, there would be 8 or 9 people you talked about before Andrew Yang. Now, at least some of the polls put him in the top 5 and maybe even in the top 3. And I think that bodes well for his future as a top-tier presidential candidate. And I think that regardless of this poll being qualifying or not, that it's getting hard to justify leaving Andrew Yang off the stage. Ultimately, I don't think anybody is going to win this but Biden or Sanders. But at this stage, he still has enough support, I feel, to warrant being on that stage, whether you like him or not. And finally, I think this really does show that this is going to be a Sanders-Biden battle. That's what this is showing. Many polls across other states have shown that where Buttigieg is strong some places and Warren is strong some places, Biden versus Sanders, it's coming down to that across much of the country. And I think that New Mexico is going to be just one example of how this could be a razor thin, contest right down to the end between Biden and between Sanders. But what's really important to see here is the numbers versus Trump. And if you look at the numbers versus Trump, the top 4 polling Democrats in national terms, Sanders, Biden, Warren, and Buttigieg, all defeat Trump in a prospective New Mexico poll, often by large margins. But what this shows here is an absolutely gargantuan 18-point lead for Bernie Sanders over Donald Trump. Even if you factor in the maximum margin of error, this is an outstanding poll for Bernie, indeed for all of the frontrunners, but for Bernie especially, this has the greatest value. And I'll tell you why. It's about what I've talked about in previous videos. Right now, Joe Biden's edge has nothing to do with what he believes in and everything to do with the fact that he's perceived as the safe choice, as the electable choice, as the pragmatic choice, as the guy who, whether you like him or not, whether he inspires you or not, He's going to beat Trump, and that's goal number one. Biden has the electability edge. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, has the enthusiasm edge. People don't always like Bernie Sanders, although he does have extremely high favorables. But when they like him, man, they love him. People don't vote for Bernie Sanders because they're on the guy. People vote for Bernie Sanders because they believe in him and his vision, his historical record, his view about what America needs to be in the future. He inspires people. Biden doesn't inspire people, at least not a majority of people who are planning to vote for him. And so when you see a poll like this, yeah, it's great news for Buttigieg, Biden, Warren, and Sanders, but for Sanders especially, it helps to tear down this narrative that Biden is the only electable candidate. This might help Biden's argument that he is indeed electable. But when you make the case that it's not only Joe Biden that can defeat Donald Trump, that it's perhaps multiple candidates, then Biden loses one of the very core planks of his entire campaign, which is that, like me or hate me, I'm the only guy that can beat Donald Trump. Well, polls like this poke holes in that narrative. And that's why this is especially important for Bernie Sanders. He's the one that can catch Joe Biden. He's the one that can pass Joe Biden. He's the one that I feel has the greatest enthusiasm, but is still held back by an erroneous belief that his views are too impractical or too extreme to appeal to moderates, to appeal to the general electorate. That's not the case. We see it in matchup poll versus matchup poll against Trump. Bernie Sanders often beats the rest of the field, or is at the very least similar to Biden in terms of his ability to beat Donald Trump. So all in all, this is very important data for Bernie Sanders. Of course, New Mexico is just one state. There's 50 states and New Mexico isn't a particularly big one. So when it comes down to delegates for the actual nomination, New Mexico won't play that big of a role. But it's yet another narrative booster for Bernie Sanders, and it's another shot at Joe Biden's narrative.